Hi everyone, I hope you're well. So over the last few years, I have been watching a lot of content here and on other platforms about sustainable fashion and ethical fashion. And, I have been interested in this sort of thing for a while. I've always liked fashion, or at least I have been liking it for a long time. When things get really popular, they tend to get sometimes too simplified or oversimplified, and sometimes that leads to people reproducing facts that aren't really factual, and sometimes these oversimplified facts or things that are said become myths themselves. So today I just want to talk about 5 of these ideas that have become commonly implied or commonly said among these communities of about sustainable fashion or ethical fashion. Sometimes by the marketing itself, or by companies that are selling ethical or sustainable fashion. I would say that's probably more commonly the case. Actually, it tends to be companies that are oversimplifying things to make themselves seem better and stuff like that, but. So the first one that I wanted to mention is the fact that, the idea that expensive or luxury prices mean that the clothes will be made more ethically or more sustainably. To some extent, this can be said to be true, but just because something is expensive or is from a designer company, brand, doesn't mean that it's made ethically. It just means that the design is original, it's made, at least it is supposed to be made with much better materials and with a much better construction. That's something that you can get at a mall or what have you, or a fast fashion store. Now, it goes without saying that if you buy a $5 shirt from Shein or something, that's going to be made most certainly under unethical circumstances, and it's also not sustainable. But just because you buy something that is expensive, the thing with manufacturing and all is that very often companies can legally state that their clothes, on their tags at least, they can legally state that their clothes have been made in France or Italy or what have you, and really most of the manufacturing, or a lot of it at least, has been made in Cambodia or Bangladesh or some other country where workers can get paid very little for what they make. I don't think we should count on luxury fashion just on principle to be particularly transparent about everything that they do. Now, there's going to obviously be some overlap between brands that are luxury priced and brands that are also sustainable and ethical, or at least they are working with those principles in mind. So my point is not that luxury brands are unethical or just as bad as fast fashion, but you just kind of have to do more specific research on the specific companies that you're gonna be buying from. Another common idea is that the best thing you can do with your clothes that you don't wear or you don't like is to donate them. I'll leave a link down below as to some reasons as to why that's not really necessarily the case. Now, obviously, it is one of the better things that you can do, especially in comparison to throwing them in the trash or what have you. But just because you donate them doesn't mean that they're going to go to someone who wants to wear them or who is going to wear them. A lot of the times, the clothes that are sold, the clothes that you donate are going to be sold to be made into scrap, rags and stuff like that. Sometimes they'll just be sold as secondhand clothes on a third world country. There is some debate as to whether it is a good idea or not, because there are some arguments that state that it is negatively affecting the local economies of the cities in the third world countries where these secondhand clothes are being sold. But there's some arguments on both sides. And what I also want to say with this is that shelters don't necessarily need clothes the most. You should probably ask the specific shelters that you're going to donate to what they need the most. Usually it is personal care items, hygiene items, not really clothes. A lot of shelters and places like that accept donations actually tend to have sort of an overload of clothes, and so those clothes, because how little demand there is for certain types of clothes, a lot of them will end up in landfills even if they have been donated. So if you want to make sure that your clothes are actually getting worn, you could just give them to specific friends or family members who ask for them, who do want them. These are ways in which you can make the process of those clothes going into landfills much slower. Ideally, what you should do is keep the clothes, make them into something else, downcycle or upcycle them. If you like the fabric, for example, you can make like a cosmetic pouch or something of the sort. Or if it's stained, you can make a rag. If they just don't fit you that well, or there's something wrong with them that can be fixed, you can either learn yourself to fix minor things, or you can get them to a tailor for them to fix those things, or a seamstress. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be donating clothes, but if you ever find yourself shopping for clothes or whatever, if you ever find yourself thinking, oh, not sure if I will like this, but I could just donate it if I don't like it, then don't buy it, because it's very likely that those clothes aren't necessarily going to end up with someone else who will love it. Like I said, sometimes they just end up being trash. Number 3 is the idea that sustainable brands aren't any more expensive than fast fashion brands. I cannot tell you how often I've seen articles or videos even state that, oh, it's a myth that they're more expensive. And then immediately after that they say, well, they are more expensive, but it's totally worth it. No. So they are more expensive, that is a fact, that obviously makes them much less accessible to most people. And I'm not saying that they're more expensive for a bad reason. They have very good reasons to be more expensive. It's just that, fast fashion has kind of skewed our idea of what clothes should cost. But the fact is, we shouldn't try to deny that people are still going to find it too inaccessible to buy a solid, simple dress for $200 to be something that they're just not going to buy, especially when they could just buy, something much cheaper somewhere else. I mean, it's just not realistic for the average person. I've also noticed that a lot of people here on the internet find it very easy to say, well, there's a lot of really accessible brands that you can buy online and stuff. But the thing is that obviously we don't all live in the same countries. A lot of sustainable brands tend to be also smaller than brands like H&M or whatever. Those tend to offer worldwide shipping. The smaller brands, they sometimes don't, because it's just not, something that they have in their budget, or something that they could make, but the shipping would be so expensive that consumers would probably not buy it internationally anyway. And all of that shipping cost would just add to the cost of the clothes themselves. So I think we just should stop giving this idea that we can all do exactly the same things for sustainable fashion, And I'm not justifying fast fashion or people buying fast fashion, but for most people, it's not going to be just a matter of replacing Shein with Everlane and Patagonia, So I'm not saying that most people can't afford to be sustainable. I think people can. It always depends a lot on your very specific circumstances. That actually brings me to my next point, which is that sustainable fashion means buying from sustainable brands. And again, this is one of those ideas that it's very convenient for the companies themselves to push out, like, oh, we are the better alternative to these brands, these brands replace these brands. And, to some extent, that's a good idea and everything. If you have money, I mean, you might as well, right? But sustainable doesn't necessarily mean instead of buying from here, you buy from here. For one, you don't have to buy everything brand new all the time. Maybe if you want something very specific, or of course if you want underwear, earrings, things that can't really be sold secondhand. Most of the time when you're just shopping for clothes or whatever, you can just buy things secondhand. You can go to vintage stores, you can swap, you can mend your own clothes. Maybe, or find a tailor or seamstress to mend your clothes for you. And also just get more wear out of the clothes that you already have. And this is not something that everyone can and that I'm saying that everyone can do and that everyone should start to do immediately. It's better to do a little bit better than to just not bother with improving anything at all. You have probably seen at this point that sort of pyramid of like what you should do preferably. And the first one is like use the stuff that you already own, swap with friends, buy secondhand and things like that. And at the very end, or at the very top, the smallest part of the pyramid says to buy new clothes. I also want to mention that I think sometimes these, not just companies, but sometimes even, commentators, what is that called, vloggers, YouTubers, people who talk about sustainable fashion will often place too much and exaggerated importance on what the individual is doing. Because at the end of it all, we've all heard the phrase vote with your dollar and everything. But to be honest, I think it's more of a rhetorical device than anything else. Obviously, it's a good idea to change your habits, especially if they're contributing negatively to the environment or to other people's lives. But it's kind of naive or sometimes just inaccurate to say that our small changes make a big difference, when really our small changes make a small difference. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't encourage people to make better or more sustainable choices. If you really scratch at this issue of sustainability and the issue with manufacturing and unethical manufacturing and how people aren't being paid fairly for their work, and how resources are being used irresponsibly and all these things, you'll find that it's more of a political issue than anything else. Definitely more of a political issue problem rather than a problem of individuals just making choices that are not good. So as long as factories are allowed to work in conditions that we wouldn't want to support, as long as these policies that are supposed to protect workers aren't actually enforced, we can just pretend that the solution is for us to just buy somewhere else. The problem is much larger than we are. And we can obviously, support the better policies and the enforcement of those policies. But a lot of this work is things that we just don't have much of a control over. And I know that a lot of us don't want to hear it, because it's like we want to think that we can do a huge difference for people sometimes, right? And a lot of these problems are related to things that are beyond, not just beyond our control, but that are such abstract problems that go even bigger, go even beyond fashion and making clothes, like corruption, poverty, things that are not just sometimes causing and sometimes just making these things worse, especially in third world countries. My fifth and last point is one that I feel that is probably going to be the most controversial one, but it is the idea that vegan leather is a more sustainable or somehow just a generally better idea or a better alternative to real leather. I've seen this idea really often in articles, videos, it's sometimes by companies that are changing to vegan leather, which to me, honestly, I'm just cynical, but sometimes it seems like these companies are changing to vegan leather under the guise of sustainability, because vegan leather is probably much cheaper to produce and they want to charge the same price because it's more sustainable, but actually, just make more profit from it. But anyways, but aside from that, I've also seen some people who are not related to any companies or anything say that vegan leather is somehow a better option or a better idea. And I'm not saying that real leather is necessarily better either, but the issue is just really, really complicated. Most vegan leather out there is really just plastic. It's just made of plastic and that's it. You have probably heard of, mushroom leather and other types of vegetable-made leather. And those are pretty rare to find in the market, and also even those ones tend to need a little bit of plastic in order to keep them together. The making of vegan leather is toxic to the environment. When it goes back to the environment, after it's being used or after it's starting to disintegrate, that is obviously also damaging to the environment. And the thing is, vegan leather or PU, plastic leather, it has to be replaced much more often, and I mean much more often than real leather. Now, I'm not saying that real leather is much better necessarily. That depends on a lot of things, really. But those tend to last decades or even generations sometimes, and it takes much less time for them to biodegrade once they have actually been thrown away. Of course, there is a real ethical issue with real leather, and I'm not going to deny that. Even though there's a lot of cruelty involved in the making of real leather, there's also a lot of cruelty, or should I say damage at the end of it all, to animals and all kinds of animals really, in the making and the reinsertion of plastic to the environment. And those effects of plastic in the environment are also very serious, and they harm all kinds of animals, not just the ones that leather is made from. I also want to mention that there's different ways to tan a hide to make leather, and they do make a pretty big difference because they're not equally harmful to the environment. One of them is chrome tanning, which is the most common for the market. It's used commercially because it's very fast to tan that way. The waste it produces is really toxic to the environment as well. Vegetable tanning is also an alternative, and with that technique, plants and bark are used to tan the hide because of the acids that are contained in those materials in the bark. Third one is brain tanning, which is a very, very traditional and the oldest method to, from what I know, it seems to be the oldest method to tan a hide, which is when you use the brains of the animal to tan the hide itself because of the acids that are contained in the brains. Pretty much as sustainable as it gets for making clothes, for making leather. Now, the last two methods that I mentioned are by far more sustainable than chrome tanning, but like I mentioned, chrome tanning is also the most widely used. So most of the leather things that you'll find out there are going to be made by chrome tanning. So really, at the end of it all, the alternative is for you to decide the best alternative. But I do think that if you buy one piece from real leather, and you just keep that forever and ever, you never replace it with any other one. If it has any damage, you get it fixed or you fix it yourself. That is probably a better alternative than to buy a PU leather, fake leather piece and then have that fall apart and then buy another one, and then that falls apart after a while and then you buy another one. In the end, there's always more research to be made regarding these topics. These things are very complicated, and really this video is only touching on a few aspects of things that you might want to reconsider regarding sustainable fashion. So I get the feeling that some of these things you might have already know, or you might have thought of before you came across this video, but I still hope that you learned something from this video, and I hope you liked it, you enjoyed watching it, and we will see each other in the next one. Bye!